In this episode, we're going to talk about how to create a compelling fantasy race. Hello everyone, my name is Aiden and this is AuthorQuest. Thank you so much for joining me today as we talk about creating compelling sci-fi fantasy races. In a previous video I talked about 20 sci-fi fantasy race archetypes. I highly recommend the video, so go check it out when you get the chance. Always remember that everything that I'm talking about here is a guideline. You can go outside of it, you can do your own thing. There's so many different ways to come up with an interesting sci-fi fantasy race, but there are a few key things that you can do to make sure that they don't fall flat. A lot of new authors, me included, think that you have to make your fantasy races have weird anatomy or make sure that they have really weird languages or really in-depth cultural backgrounds that no one is ever going to actually know about. Remember, you don't want to create an anthology for your race. I mean, well, maybe you do. The more important thing is you want to make sure that your reader wants an anthology for your race. I'm going to offer you 3 separate dimensions that you can use and add to your fantasy races to give them depth instantly. Dimension number 1, what does the fantasy race add to the story? A fantasy race matters in as much as the benefit or cost that they add to the story, to the main characters, or to the fantasy world at large. The benefit of having a mountain dweller in your story is that they know where the secret doors are. The benefit of having goblins in Harry Potter is they keep the money safe, maybe a little bit too well. And there doesn't have to be both cost and benefit. Orcs from the Lord of the Rings are all cost. They cost the characters time and effort. But a race is definitely more interesting when they have both a cost and a benefit. Take the orcs from the World of Warcraft series. They are far more interesting because while they are antagonists that cost the main characters, they do have benefits that when they band together with humans and elves to stop the various demons and undead. Dimension number 2, unique strengths. There is strength in numbers, but if that's all a race has, it will fall flat. Power scaling is very important in fantasy races. A strong species without weakness isn't engaging because there are no stakes. A weak species without strengths isn't engaging because they lack a payoff. Every fantasy race needs to bring something to the table that other races lack. Whether it's physical, magical, spiritual, political, or intellectual, they must have a unique strength. Another thing to add is the greater the strength, they must have an equally grave weakness, even if it's something as simple as hubris. And before I get on to my third dimension, I encourage you to check out my online store where I've been accumulating a library of character plot sheets that can be a great starting point for your stories and for your D&D campaigns. Dimension number 3, mortality/scarcity. A race matters in a story based on how close an individual or the total species in the population is close to death. What do I mean by this? I once heard that every human being is 5 minutes away from death, but the countdown repeats after every new breath you take. When we dwell on that way of thinking, it increases the value we have in breathing and living. Same thing for our races and our characters. How close a species or member of the species is to its end affects the reader's interest in the race. Life is more interesting the more we realize how fleeting it is. The more precious life is, the more interesting the species is. On the flip side, some fantasy races are interesting because they are immortal. There's a novelty to the idea of living a long life. The idea of having a vast past and a vast future invokes a sense of wonder. In my experience, this wonder isn't quite enough to keep a race interesting. If 300 years pass, the reader doesn't have to necessarily worry that the immortal race died. In my opinion, this makes the race a little less interesting in the long run. If there's a seemingly endless amount of members of the species, then that too will decrease the interest of the race. Think of the trope of having an army of nameless creatures like the Chitauri from the Avengers. If there are only 1 or 2 members of this race left, the stakes are incredibly high that they survive. This, however, is a little bit overdone. I love the last one's character archetype, as I explained in my character archetypes video, but again, it's a little overplayed in this day and age. There's so much more to this idea of mortality and scarcity, and there is no one right way, but it is important that you know the elements you can play with to make a race more interesting in this first dimension, or in this third dimension. I do really like the idea, and it's something that I've played around with in my own stories. I've written it before, I've put it down. I can't quite make it work just yet, but I really want somebody to do this. It's in my Race Archetypes video. It's not the last of their kind, it's the first of their kind. Like, imagine an Adam and Eve's kind of scenario. I want to read that book. I want to read a fantasy Adam and Eve book where it's the first two elves, it's the first two humans, it's the first two unicorns, you know, whatever that is. I want to read that story because I don't think it's been done very much, and if I'm totally wrong, let me know. Tell me. I would love to read that book. So if that book exists, let me know. Put it down in the comments. Anyway, there you go. That's 3 dimensions that you can add to quickly add some depth to your fantasy races. You can apply it to any fantasy race and help them leap off the page. That's mortality / scarcity, cost versus benefit, and unique strengths. These aren't everything that go into making a fantasy race, but if you pay attention to these elements, I promise you that there will be more 3-dimensional than if you didn't. Thanks for watching. Check out this video.